You're listening to Reverie, True Crime, your gateway to the darkest corners of human nature, where we expose the hidden truths of human depravity. These harrowing stories serve as a sobering reminder to keep our senses keen and our awareness sharp, for predators lurk in unexpected places, patiently waiting and observing. Join us as we unravel mysteries, explore motives, and seek justice for victims as we bring awareness to these cases. Listener discretion is advised.
Hello and welcome to Reverie True Crime. I'm your host, Paige. This is a special episode. The daughter of the victim reached out to me. She's a woman who never met her mother and spent nearly 30 years believing that she had been abandoned, only to learn that her mother had been brutally murdered. She asked me to tell her mother's story. So this episode is for Krissi and for Wilma. It's early morning on October 4th, 1978 in Lyon County, Iowa. A telephone company employee is laying cable along Highway 182 near West Lyon School. It's rural farmland that's flat, open, and quiet, the kind of place where you can see for miles. He's working along the roadside ditch when something catches his eye. At first, he thinks it's debris, trash maybe, something discarded and left to rot behind the tall, browning weeds. However, as he gets closer, he realizes what he's looking at. It's the body of a woman. She's face down in the ditch, severely decomposed, and the smell is overwhelming. The worker backs away and calls the police. Wilma's daughter Krissi later said, quote, "He almost stepped on her, and he thought it was a mannequin at first. And then there was the horrific discovery that, no, that's not a mannequin." End quote. Krissi said the teenager called the police, who responded to the scene. When investigators arrive, they find a scene that will haunt them for decades. The woman is naked from the waist up. Her green khaki pants and underwear are pulled down around her left leg, wrapped near her ankle. She's wearing white patent leather calf-length go-go boots. They were the kind that were popular in the 60s and the 70s. A braided hemp rope is loosely tied around her feet with significant slack between her ankles, and it had been used to drag her body into the ditch. When authorities turn her body over, they discover that she has no face, since decomposition has ravaged her features beyond recognition. Her lower jaw is missing and only 2 intact teeth remain in her skull. There's no identification, wallet, purse, or clues anywhere. The investigators don't know who she is or where she came from. They don't even know exactly when she died, only that her body has been lying in that ditch for weeks, maybe even months. They call her Jane Doe, and for 27 years, that's all she would be. Jane Doe. A nameless, forgotten woman. A woman who nobody came looking for. However, that woman did have a name. Wilma June Nissen. She was a 23-year-old mother who deserved so much better than the life and the death that she was given. This is her story. Let's get started. To understand how Wilma June Nissen ended up dead in an Iowa ditch, we have to go back to the beginning, because Wilma's story is not just about her murder. It's about a life that was stolen from her long before she died. Wilma June Nissen was born on October 19, 1954, in San Francisco, California. Her mother soon walked out on the family when Wilma was just 8 years old, leaving Wilma and her younger sister Mona, who was deaf and unable to speak, with their father, Charles Nissen. Their father, Charles, was neglectful, abusive, and totally incapable of caring for 2 children. So when Charles lost his job, things got worse and the family moved into a car. Think about that for a minute. A car. Not a house, not even a shelter. A car. During the day, Wilma's father would lock Mona in the trunk of the car, and Wilma, a 9 or 10-year-old child, was forced to wander the streets looking for food. The girls did not attend school. They were locked in a bedroom closet while Charles was at work. Wilma's daughter, Krissi, would later say, quote, "This was a 9 or 10-year-old child. She never got to be a kid." End quote. Imagine being that age, alone, hungry, and scared, responsible for keeping yourself and your sister alive. Wilma didn't have a childhood. She had survival. In December of 1964, when Wilma was 10 years old, she was placed with her first foster family, Maxine and Marshall Holt, in Anaheim, California. According to Krissi, who spoke with the Holts years later, Wilma lacked the most basic skills. She couldn't read or write. She didn't even know how to use a fork. A 10-year-old child who didn't know how to use a fork. That's the level of neglect we're talking about. But the Holts were different. They were kind and patient. They described Wilma as a, quote, happy, bubbly child who learned quickly. She brought love and happiness to their home. Wilma was only able to stay with the Holts for 2 years, until 1966, but she kept in touch with them until she was about 22 years old. The Holts would see her once or twice a year for her birthday or to take her to the park. They truly cared about her. They remembered her fondly. After 1966, Wilma was bounced around to multiple foster homes. She never stayed anywhere long enough to feel stable, to feel safe, or to feel loved. Her final foster home was with Vince and Alice Haas, the same couple who would later adopt Wilma's daughter. When Wilma aged out of the foster care system at 18, she was cast out into the world totally alone, uneducated, unskilled, and utterly unprepared for life. What happened next was tragically predictable. At only 18 years old, Wilma June Nissen had no money, education, family support, or resources, so she did what many young women in her situation do. She married a man who promised to take care of her. His name was Donald Eugene Wellington, born May 10, 1948. And he didn't take care of her. He pimped her out. In August of 1973, at the age of 18, Wilma married Donald. They lived in Hollywood, California, and the marriage was abusive and exploitative. During the last 2 years of her marriage to Donald, Wilma was arrested multiple times for prostitution in LA, but only in the Southern California area. There's no evidence that she had any connection to the Sioux Falls, South Dakota area during this time. Her fingerprints were taken and filed with the Los Angeles Police Department in 1974. That fingerprint card would become critically important 32 years later. Wilma's nickname was Boots because she often wore white calf-length go-go boots, the same boots that she would later be found wearing when she died. Donald Wellington forced her into prostitution, but only in Southern California as far as records show. She hitchhiked from place to place within that region, wherever Donald told her to go. Investigators believe that Wilma may have tried to escape Donald at some point. A rumor surfaced that Wilma had been walking from California to Florida with a man and a small child, possibly her son, Michael Jr., and that along the way, the child was taken from her by Child Protective Services. Krissi believes that this might have been Michael Jr., who was removed during that attempted escape. Perhaps Wilma was trying to get away from Donald Wellington. Perhaps she was trying to start over somewhere far from California. Authorities could never confirm this story, but they believe it may be key to understanding her movements and her desperation to escape her circumstances. Eventually, around October of 1975, Wilma left Donald. She entered into a relationship with a man named Michael Gene Pizarro, born Michael Gene Walker in 1944. Michael had changed his name in the early 1960s after a difficult childhood. He and his half-brother, Vaughn Walker, were quote-unquote prison babies, born to a mother who was incarcerated while pregnant. They were raised in foster care, and when their mother took custody later, Michael left and went back to his foster name, Pizarro. There's a photo that survived the years of Wilma standing with Michael Pizarro, who is holding a baby. That baby was Michael Pizarro Jr., born on May 10, 1974, in San Diego. It's unclear whether Wilma had fully separated from Donald Wellington by this time, and Donald Wellington Jr. was born in December of 1974, just 7 months after Michael Jr. The timeline suggests that Wilma may have still been connected to Donald when she became pregnant with Michael Jr., adding to the complexity and tragedy of her circumstances. But Wilma was in no position to care for a baby. She was still surviving through sex work, and she was still homeless much of the time, still deeply traumatized. Michael Jr. was eventually removed from her care and placed into foster care, and by October of 1975, Wilma was living in Long Beach with a man named Robert Irvin. On May 11, 1976, they lived at 4922 Paramount in Lakewood, California. On January 7, 1977, they were residing at 725 East 6th Street in Long Beach. On June 21, 1977, Wilma and Robert Irvin married. They were living and working at a shop located at the intersection of Bellflower and Artesia in Bellflower, California. Not long after, on August 18, 1977, Wilma gave birth to a baby girl at a Long Beach hospital, Crystal Joy Irvin, who now goes by Krissi. Krissi was Wilma's third child. She had given birth to 3 children by the age of 22. All 3 were born premature at 7 months, and all of them would be taken from her care. Wilma wanted to be a good mother, wanted to keep her daughter, wanted things to be different this time, but they just weren't. Krissi, like her 2 older brothers, was removed from Wilma's custody shortly after birth and placed into foster care. She was adopted by Vince and Alice Haas. They were the same couple who had fostered Wilma years earlier. Wilma lost all 3 of her children. After Krissi's birth, investigators believe that Wilma went to San Diego, where for a short time she lived in a camper parked on the street near 751 Fifth Avenue. It was there that she met Charles Inman Belt, a 54-year-old man. In February of 1978, Wilma left Robert Irvin and moved to Atlanta, Georgia with Charles Inman Belt. They lived in Charles's mother's house. This was the first time that Wilma had ever left California. Georgia was a new world. Just a few days later, Wilma disappeared. She didn't tell Charles Belt that she was leaving. She was just gone. When law enforcement later interviewed Charles, he said he thought that she had hitchhiked back to California. But Wilma didn't go back to California. Somehow, and this is where Krissi believes something sinister happened, Wilma ended up over 1,000 miles away in Sioux Falls, South Dakota. She had no car, no money, and no known connections to that area. Between the time that Wilma left Donald Wellington in 1975 and her arrival in Sioux Falls in 1978, her prostitution arrest stopped. There are no records of her being arrested in California during that time. So, Krissi believes that Wilma may have been tricked or trafficked into going to Sioux Falls. How else would a woman with no resources, no vehicle, and no connections travel over 1,000 miles from Atlanta, Georgia to South Dakota? Sadly, no one came looking for Wilma June Nissen. Sometime between February and June of 1978, Wilma arrived in Sioux Falls, South Dakota. Sioux Falls is a small city, the largest in South Dakota, but it's still small. The population was around 80,000 in 1978. It's about an hour's drive south of Lyon County, Iowa, where her body would eventually be found. Wilma was 23 years old, and she was still working as an escort and dancer to survive. She was working for an escort service that went by 2 names, Playgirls or Playmates. The service sent women like escorts, dancers, sometimes prostitutes, to private parties in Sioux Falls and the surrounding areas, including rural Lyon County, Iowa. These were not big publicized events. These were private parties that were very discreet. The parties were often held in rural farmhouses or barns, parties where wealthy men paid for entertainment. Wilma worked these parties throughout the summer of 1978. At some point, she met 2 other women. One was a Black woman who went by the stage name Sugar. The other was a lighter-skinned Black woman who went by the stage name Peaches. Sugar and Peaches were also escorts and dancers. Additionally, they were known for something else, too. They were known for robbing other escorts and sometimes even the clients. It was a dangerous game, but in the world that Wilma lived in, danger was everywhere. Investigators now believe that sometime in late June, July, or early August of 1978, Wilma attended a private party in western Lyon County, Iowa. Sugar and Peaches were also there. That night, something went very, very wrong. We don't know exactly what happened at that party, but investigators have pieced together a theory based on evidence, witness interviews, and the behavior patterns of the suspects. They believe Wilma was robbed. Sugar and Peaches, two women who had a known history of robbing other escorts, targeted Wilma. She had just been paid for working the party. She had cash on her, and they wanted it. Investigators believe the robbery turned violent, that Wilma fought back and tried to defend herself. An autopsy later found dislocations in her elbow and neck, evidence of a struggle. But Wilma was overpowered, and then she was murdered. Investigators have never told the public how Wilma was killed. They've kept those details confidential because only the killer would know them. It's one of the few pieces of evidence that they can use to verify a confession. What we do know is this: Wilma was killed with such brutality, such violence, that her lower jaw was completely missing when her body was found. She had no face, her teeth were smashed, and only 2 intact teeth remained. Whether her jaw was removed during the murder or afterward, perhaps to prevent identification, is unclear. Authorities did confirm that her lower jaw was not gone because of wildlife. So after Wilma was killed, her body was dragged by her feet. Investigators found evidence of this, including drag marks, the positioning of the body, the rope tied around her ankles. Her pants and underwear were pulled down around her left leg, suggesting she may have been sexually assaulted either before or after death. Then her killers dumped her in a roadside ditch along Highway 182, about a mile south and a mile and a half west of West Lyon School, in a remote, rural part of Lyon County. They left her there, face down, to decompose in the summer heat. Then they disappeared. When Wilma's body was found on October 4th, 1978, investigators had almost nothing to work with. They had no way to identify her, no missing person report, or any eyewitnesses. Her body was so badly decomposed that her face was decomposed to the point that she didn't have one for anyone to even recognize. With her jaw missing and most of her teeth gone, even dental records wouldn't help, assuming they even had dental records to compare. All they had were her clothes: green khaki pants with braid trim, white go-go boots, bikini-style underwear, a silver ring with gold indentation, and a braided hemp rope tied around her feet. A massive search was conducted at the scene. Officers sifted through the dirt in the ditch, looking for her missing jaw, her teeth, any piece of evidence that might help identify her. But they found nothing. Lyon County investigators did everything they could. They sent out bulletins. They checked missing persons reports across the Midwest. They followed every lead, but unfortunately, nobody ever came forward. Nobody reported a missing woman matching her description. It was as if Wilma June Nissen had simply ceased to exist, and nobody noticed. So she was buried in Riverview Cemetery in Rock Rapids, Iowa, under a simple headstone that read, "Unidentified Female, October 4th, 1978. For years, Sheriff Blythe Blumendahl would visit that grave. He was elected sheriff in 2001, and from day one, Wilma's case consumed him. In 2006, something extraordinary happened. On January 31st, 2006, 27 years after Wilma's body was found, a laboratory technician at the Iowa Division of Criminal Investigation in Des Moines was running fingerprint comparisons because of Blumendahl's persistence. She was working with Jane Doe's left thumbprint, which had been preserved from the original autopsy. She found a match. The thumbprint belonged to a woman who had been arrested for prostitution in Los Angeles in 1974. Her name? Wilma June Nissen. Finally, after more than 2.5 decades, Jane Doe had a name. A new pink granite headstone for Wilma's grave was soon donated by Family Memorials by Gibson. This time it read, Wilma June Nissen, 1955 to 1978. Blumendahl said, quote, "Wilma was a human being and deserves to be handled that way, not just in life, but now in death." End quote. It was Sheriff Blumendahl who made the decision to run her fingerprints through updated databases. It was his persistence and his refusal to give up that gave Wilma her name back. He said in an interview years later, quote, "It's a homicide. It happened in my county. This is my job, and I will not drop it." End quote. Blumendahl kept a paper timeline of Jane Doe's life, or what little they knew of it, stretched across his office wall. It was a constant reminder of a murder unsolved. He admitted, quote, "There isn't a day that goes by that I don't think about the case." End quote. But identifying Wilma was only the first step. Now investigators had to find her family, and they had to find her killer. They started searching for Wilma's relatives. That's when they discovered something heartbreaking. Wilma had a daughter who is now 28 years old and had been searching for her mother her entire life. Krissi Atkinson, formerly Krissi Haas, born Crystal Joy Irvin, was barely 1 year old when her mother was murdered. She was adopted by Vince and Alice Haas, the same couple who had fostered Wilma years earlier. They were in their 60s and 70s by the time they adopted Krissi. They rarely spoke about Wilma. In fact, for years, they wouldn't even say her name. Krissi grew up in Seal Beach, California, knowing almost nothing about her biological mother. She knew she had been adopted, and she knew her mother had given her up, but she didn't know why. Krissi said, quote, "I always had this fantasy that I'd find her one day. I didn't expect her to be my mom, but I thought that I would find her, and I had this whole delusional fantasy of like sitting on a front porch, drinking iced tea, and just talking." End quote. Krissi spent her childhood and young adulthood searching. She would call random phone numbers of people with matching names. She would search public records, and she would ask her adoptive parents questions that they refused to answer. Krissi said, quote, "I was always trying to find her." End quote. When Krissi was young, she went snooping in her adoptive parents' office and found some paperwork. That's how she learned her mother's name was Wilma June Nissen. She wrote it down, memorized it, and held onto it like a lifeline. Then, nearly 30 years later, that name appeared in a newspaper article. In 2006, a friend of Krissi's adoptive mother, a woman who had helped Krissi locate her biological father years earlier, came over to Krissi's house and asked what Krissi's biological mother's name was. Krissi told her, Wilma June Nissen. The woman handed Krissi a newspaper article. Krissi recalled, quote, "They put a little article in a newspaper in Long Beach that a 27-year-old cold case, Jane Doe, had been identified as Wilma June Nissen." End quote. Krissi's world stopped. She said, quote, "That was not an awesome moment." End quote. Krissi immediately called the authorities in Iowa. She provided information about her birth, her adoption, and her adoptive parents. Everything checked out. They needed DNA confirmation, so Krissi went to her local police department to provide a DNA sample. The results came back in April of 2006, almost 2 months after that first press conference. It was confirmed. The woman found in that Iowa ditch in 1978, the woman who had been Jane Doe for 27 years, was Krissi's mother, and she had been brutally murdered. Krissi said, quote, "I doubt I'll ever know why, but I at least want to know who." End quote. After Wilma was identified in 2006, Sheriff Blumendahl and his team renewed their investigation with fresh energy. They re-interviewed witnesses, followed new leads, dug into Wilma's life in the months before her death, and they identified suspects. Investigators also learned more about the aliases that Wilma had used throughout her life. She had gone by multiple last names from Wellington to Irvin to Pizarro and then Belt. She occasionally used the first name Amy, including Amy Pizarro, Amy Irvin, and Amy Nissen. They also learned tragic details about Wilma's extended family. Michael Pizarro Sr., the father of Wilma's first son, died in 1989 in Key West, Florida. Wilma's mother, June Nissen, died in Magna, Utah in 2003 before ever learning her daughter's fate. Charles Belt died in 1986. As for Donald Wellington, investigators wanted to speak with him, not as a suspect. They stressed that he was not suspected in Wilma's murder, but as a witness who might have information about her life. Back in 2000, a photo was taken of Donald. He was believed to be living in the Palmdale, California area, described by investigators as a, quote, high-risk, dangerous community. Donald had an extensive criminal record, including drug and burglary convictions, along with pimping. But according to information later provided by Krissi, Donald Wellington has since passed away. So that avenue closed. In 2007, Sheriff Blumendahl made a controversial decision. He ordered Wilma's body exhumed. He hoped that advances in forensic technology, particularly DNA analysis and forensic anthropology, might provide new clues about how she died, and perhaps even identify her killer. The exhumation took place in September of 2007, but when investigators opened the grave, they found a devastating problem. There was approximately 50 gallons of water inside of the body bag. Water had seeped into the coffin over the years, washing away potential DNA evidence. The results were so disappointing. Forensic anthropologists examined her remains, but time and water had destroyed much of the evidence. Blumendahl said at the time, trying to remain optimistic despite the setbacks, quote, "I'm going to call it extremely successful at this time," end quote. In May of 2016, 38 years after Wilma's murder, the Lyon County Sheriff's Department made a stunning announcement. They released a photo of a woman they believed was responsible for Wilma's death. A photo of a Black woman who had worked as an escort and dancer in the 1970s. She went by the stage name Sugar. The photo was taken sometime in the mid-1970s. It shows a young woman with an afro looking directly at the camera. Chief Deputy Jerry Berkey, who had been working on the case for over 15 years, explained, quote, "She and Nissen worked as dancers, escorts, and prostitutes at parties in and around Sioux Falls, South Dakota, and in Lyon County during the summer of 1978, end quote. Jerry said that Sugar was known for robbing other escorts and even clients. She had a reputation, and people in the industry knew to watch out for her. Investigators had interviewed Sugar multiple times over the years, but she consistently denied any involvement in Wilma's murder. She also failed 3 polygraph tests, but without physical evidence or a confession, prosecutors could not move forward with charges. However, Jerry Berkey revealed something else. Sugar had fled to Canada shortly after Wilma's murder. While in Canada, she stabbed someone and was forced to flee back to the U.S. Investigators knew where Sugar lived, but without a confession or physical evidence linking her to the murder, they couldn't make an arrest. And then there was Peaches. Peaches was described as a light-skinned Black woman, also from Canada, who worked as an escort in Sioux Falls, Yankton, South Dakota, and Thunder Bay, Ontario. Investigators believed Peaches was Sugar's accomplice, that the two of them worked together robbing escorts, clients, and possibly murdering Wilma. Unlike Sugar, Peaches has never been identified. Investigators don't know her real name or where she is. Berkey said in 2016, quote, "We cannot find the identity of Peaches. We don't know who she is," end quote. If anyone listening to this knows a woman who went by Peaches in the 1970s and 80s, who is or was a light-skinned Black woman who worked as an escort in South Dakota, Iowa, or Thunder Bay, Ontario, please contact authorities. That information could solve this case. Berkey also revealed that investigators believed they knew where Wilma was killed, at one of the private parties in western Lyon County, possibly near the town of Inwood, Iowa, which is approximately 25 miles from Sioux Falls. Berkey said, quote, "The people in the western half of our county got very defensive when we first approached them about these parties," end quote. He stressed that investigators did not suspect the partygoers themselves, but they hoped someone who attended those parties would come forward and say that they saw Wilma with Sugar or Peaches on the night that she disappeared. Berkey said, quote, "We don't suspect one of you, but we do hope one of you will come forward," end quote. So far, no one has. Over the years, investigators have collected what little physical evidence remains from Wilma's case. In 2016, the Lyon County Sheriff's Department hired a private lab to conduct DNA testing on the braided hemp rope that had been tied around Wilma's feet. The lab was able to find and amplify a very small amount of DNA. Unfortunately, it was a mixture of multiple contributors, meaning more than one person's DNA was present on the rope. This makes it difficult, if not impossible, to isolate and identify a single suspect. The DNA evidence as it stands is unhelpful to the investigation. However, technology is advancing rapidly. What couldn't be tested in 2016 might be testable now, and what can't be tested now might be testable in 5 years. Dr. Colleen Fitzpatrick, a forensic genealogist who has worked on numerous cold cases, believes that Wilma's murder can be solved. She said, quote, "Technology has advanced along the way. Cases that were looked at long ago before DNA came into the picture, you can say now, hey, we're testing on something that they didn't even think about back then. Maybe it's time to test them again and with more sensitive, more sophisticated technology." End quote. But Dr. Fitzpatrick also noted a major obstacle. Quote, "The stumbling block is getting the cooperation of the sheriff's department. Sometimes the detectives just don't have the time. We have violent crimes, we have gangs, so there's only 24 hours in a day, and sometimes they can't get to older cases." End quote. Krissi has expressed similar frustrations. She wants proof that authorities are actively investigating her mother's case. She said, quote, "All I want to know is that they're trying, that they actually care." End quote. There have also been other suspects investigated over the years. For a time, Robert Rhodes, known as the truck stop killer, was a suspect. He has been convicted of rape and 3 counts of murder in Illinois and is suspected of murdering over 50 women from 1975 to 1990. Robert lived in Sioux Falls in 1978. However, investigators have since ruled him out as Wilma's killer. In August of 2009, another potential suspect emerged when 82-year-old John Van Gameren was charged with 6 counts of perjury after lying to authorities about transporting strippers and prostitutes from Sioux Falls across the Iowa border to his home in Inwood, not far from where Wilma's body was found. But the charges against Van Gameren were later dismissed, and he was never connected to Wilma's murder. Sheriff Brian Hilt, who took over after Blumendahl retired following Sheriff Stuart Vanderstoep, has said that Wilma's case is the only cold case in Lyon County. He encourages anyone with information to come forward. Sheriff Hilt said in a statement, quote, "Someone is still around that knows what happened, either from being involved or being told about it. We need that person or persons to come forward and share the information with investigators." End quote. Since learning about her mother's murder in 2006, Krissi Atkinson has dedicated her life to keeping Wilma's case in the public eye. She originally set up all of these social media accounts, but they all got banned. Her Facebook access is completely gone. All her contacts, groups, messages, everything. Her Instagram was also banned. Even her nearly 7-year-old Reddit page was banned without warning or reason. Krissi said, quote, "It's heartbreaking and infuriating." End quote. But she refused to be silenced. Krissi created new platforms to continue her mother's story. She now has the following: a Substack newsletter at wilmasdaughter.substack.com, a Blue Sky account at KRISSIHAS1977.bsky.social, a TikTok account at Krissi_1977, a Medium publication where she shares stories at medium.com/@justice4Wilma, and a Twitter/X account at MyMomsMurder. In June of 2025, Krissi launched a website, justice4WilmaJuneNissen.com. The site includes photos of Wilma, details about her early life, information about the investigation, and a call for anyone with information to come forward. Krissi has also launched a petition inspired by Lonnie's Law to mandate transparency between law enforcement and families of missing or murdered cold case victims. The link to the petition is in the show notes, so please be sure to take a few seconds to sign that. Krissi has attended conferences that support families of missing and murdered individuals. She's talked to many journalists, true crime podcasters, and anyone who would listen to her story. In 2025, Krissi even appeared on NBC's Dateline to share her mother's story with a national audience. Krissi said, quote, "I never met my mom, but the more I find out about her after death, the more I feel connected to her. I've found more about her since she died than I ever did when she was alive, and we have so much in common that I feel like I'm missing a piece of me." End quote. Krissi describes her mother as someone who never had a chance, who was failed by every system that should have protected her, who deserved so much better. Krissi said, quote, "She had the most abusive, neglectful, what's supposed to be childhood. She didn't get that." End quote. And now, nearly 47 years after Wilma's death, Krissi is fighting to make sure that her mother is not forgotten. Wilma's case was even featured on the Six of Hearts and Iowa's Cold Case playing card deck, which is a deck that's given out to inmates in Iowa prisons in hopes that someone behind bars might have information about unsolved cases. The card shows a photo of Wilma taken in May of 1974. She has shoulder-length dark blonde hair and a muted type of expression. Her face is pale and gaunt. Former Lyon County Sheriff Craig Vinson, who worked the case when Wilma's body was first discovered in 1978, referred to her as "our girl," because although he and others did not know her name, the case was taken personally by the entire Lyon County Sheriff's Office staff. In 2007, a memorial service was held for Wilma at the Rock Rapids United Methodist Church. Maxine and Marshall Holt, Wilma's first foster parents from 1964 to 1966, were able to attend. Maxine said during the service, quote, "I think it is a pleasure to be here to honor Wilma because she brought so much love and happiness to our home." End quote. Krissi was not able to attend her mother's memorial. She sent her apologies. Sheriff Blumendahl said that one day Krissi hoped to visit her birth mother's grave, and that day eventually came. Wilma June Nissen deserves justice. Her life was stolen from her twice. The first time It was stolen by neglect, by a father who locked her sister in a trunk and forced a child to scavenge for food, by a system that bounced her from foster home to foster home, never giving her the stability that she needed, by men who exploited her the moment that she turned 18. Wilma never had a chance to be a kid. She never had a chance to learn to read, to go to school, or to dream about a future. She was forced into survival mode from the moment she was born. And survival for Wilma meant sex work, hitchhiking, and it meant dangerous men and dangerous situations. The second time her life was stolen, it was by violence, likely by two women who saw her as an easy target, who robbed her, killed her, and dumped her body in a ditch like she was garbage. For 27 years, Wilma June Nissen had no name, no headstone, and no one was looking for her. She was just Jane Doe, but she wasn't just Jane Doe. She was Wilma. She was a woman who survived unimaginable trauma, who kept going even when the world gave her no reason to, who brought two children into the world, children that she loved, even if she couldn't care for them. And she deserved better. She deserved a childhood, safety, love, and she deserved to live. Instead, she got 23 hard, painful years, and then she was murdered. But her story doesn't end in that ditch, because Krissi will not let it. Krissi is keeping her mother's memory alive. She's fighting for justice. She's making sure the world knows Wilma's name. And maybe, just maybe, someone out there knows something. Someone who was at one of those parties in the summer of 1978. Someone who heard Sugar or Peaches talk about what happened. Someone who saw something they didn't understand at the time. If that's you, please come forward. Don't let Wilma be forgotten. Don't let her killers walk free. She deserves justice, and Krissi deserves answers. This has been the story of Wilma June Nissen, a woman who was failed by every system that should have protected her, and whose murder remains unsolved nearly 47 years later. If you have any information about Wilma's case, about the women known as Sugar or Peaches, or about the private parties held in Lyon County, Iowa in the summer of 1978, please contact Crime Stoppers USA at 1-800-222-TIPS. That's 1-800-222-8477. Cold Case Coalition tip line at 385-258-3313. WeTip Anonymous tip line 1-800-78-CRIME. That's 1-800-782-7463. Sioux Falls Crime Stoppers at 605-367-7007 or toll free at 877-367-7007. You can also follow Krissi on Substack, Blue Sky, TikTok, Twitter, and be sure to check out all that information and more in the show notes. Krissi, if you're listening, thank you for trusting me to tell your mother's story. Wilma deserved so much better. Though because of you, she will never be forgotten. Rest in peace, Wilma June Nissen. You were seen. You were loved. And you mattered. Until next time, friends, stay safe and take care.
Thank you for listening to this episode. As we close out, let us not forget awareness is our greatest defense. In a world that can be dark and grim, vigilance is our beacon of hope. When it comes to the cases we have explored together that have remained unsolved, if you happen to hold a piece of the puzzle, dare to step forward. As author Lois McMaster Bujold once said, "The dead cannot cry out for justice. It is a duty of the living to do so for them." Until we reconvene, my friends, stay vigilant and stay informed.